so crazy. With this whole quarantine stuff, I've been stuck in my room, I haven't shaved, my hair's getting all crazy. It's been 2 days. Yeah, it's been 2 days. Well, either way, welcome back to the channel, JDCC, or just discussing Colonnade Cruisers. I'm your host, Joseph Duffy.
Hey, you!
I'm going to talk about why the Malaise era was actually a decent decade for cars. Now, when I mean the Malaise era, I mean the time between 1973 to about 1983-84 in American car culture, where cars got bigger, slower, more squared off, and more comfortable actually. But the main reason why is because of the whole oil crisis in 1973. It caused the American companies to finally wake up and realize, ooh, maybe we should get something that's a little bit more fuel efficient. And oh man, maybe we should actually start worrying about emissions. Which means that, your average catalytic converter that came on these vehicles was about the size of a Honda Fit, and it only made about 150 horsepower out of a V8. But I'm going to try and argue that the Malaise era was really good for cars.
Come on, here on the floor!
They're cheap. But they're still American-made, big chunks of steel that ride like boats and are comfortable, but you can find them for half the price that you would find a 60s car. And also, depending, you can actually backdate some of the early 70s ones to actually look like earlier models that were, more high performance and high horsepower.
Let's rock some more!
Another reason why Malaise era cars deserve a second look is because they're cool. I mean, there's so many weird special editions. Just a shout out to this one Instagram page where I got a good chunk of my information from called V8 or Die, and it's just Malaise era just history. The guy talks about all these weird special editions that you never really know about until you actually look into it. Like, they actually had a Frank Sinatra edition of some Plymouth, and they had a crazy SS version of an International Scout. They only made 3 of them. This was still in the day of crazy factory options that if you knew a guy, you could get something special onto your car.
Come out of here on the floor!
For the most part, especially the larger, the mid-size to full-size, they basically just became bigger and slower. But for me, you do a bumper tuck, you just take the bumper, just press it in a little bit, make it to where it doesn't look like the big bulky 5-mile-per-hour bumpers that look like they should come on an 18-wheeler. You get some air ride, and I'm telling you, you are set. You don't even need to do anything to the motor. Maybe an LS swap or something. Who knows? They are such good cruisers. Because I'm about to tell you about the best kept secret of the 70s and 80s. Velour interior. You ever heard of it? It was basically like, yo, I don't want cloth, but I also don't want leather. Which that was another kind of weird thing. Apparently, like, Cordoba, how it had Corinthian leather. Again, it was a weird time. It was Corinthian leather, because it sounded fancy. It was weird.
Soft Corinthian leather.
But velour was the shit, because it's way softer than cloth, but also it's good for a guy like me, because I used to own a Tahoe, and that had leather seats. If it's in the summer, and you're wearing shorts, and you just hop into it after going to the grocery store or just going anywhere, and you leave it for a set amount of time, my thick boy thighs, they stick to the seat, and it feels gross, Because then especially if I gotta drive, it's like, oh god. But with velour, you don't have that issue, because it's still kind of like a cloth, And it's just, it's so comfortable, seriously. If you ever have the chance to sit in a velour interior, or just like on a velour seat, like an old car, it's so nice. It's so much nicer compared to like the new cloth seats that you get in a car, because they're just rough and abrasive. They don't feel good. But with those, oh my god, you could fall asleep in that. Which brings me to my next point. These things were huge. Seriously. Like you lay down the back seat in some of these cars, it's a bed. Like the Lincoln Continental Mark V. Like, look at any of the full-size Cadillacs, Mercuries, Lincolns. I mean, again, these things were crazy comfortable. They were not fast, in any respect. But that wasn't the purpose. They were meant to be comfortable. They were meant to kind of show off the panache and style of the 60s. but in a 70s package, because it had a lot of chrome, it was big, and it showed that you were the boss.
Honey, let's rock some more, yeah.
Another good thing about the Malaise era was trucks, because this was right when that K5 Blazer was coming out. And I don't know about you, but I love those K5 Blazers, the C10s, because here's the thing, they didn't have as many restrictions. And also, another cool thing, Little Red Express, a sports pickup truck. It shows that Dodge did not care about the new decade and its new restrictions. It still had the smokestacks on the side and the wood and everything. And it was cool. And it was quick too. Seriously. Those things were really cool. And it was a good year for trucks because also they had a bunch of really cool special editions. Like look up the old Ford Broncos. They had like an old trail package. And I'm not going to lie. There was this one guy on Instagram. I'm just going to shout him out. Bullet Hole Bronco. The paint job on that Bronco looks like what I envision a nice like fall sunset in Arizona would look like. Just nice hues of like orange and yellow and red. And it's such a gorgeous paint job and paint scheme that, again, you don't see that anymore. That and also, he has a coyote swapped on things nice. But yeah, that guy is cool. And again, that just goes back to the whole thing that there were some really cool, weird special editions that we don't have anymore.
Now when you get out here.
But speaking of trucks, this was also the decade where vanning was a thing. Oh yeah. Shag carpet, old Chrysler, Chevy, Ford vans. People put crazy like mini fridges in them and crazy murals on the side. Yes, that was in the 70s. The aftermarket scene for that was amazing. And again, Chevy reflected that. Because you want to know what their advertising tagline was that year? That's more like it. Really? Really? This is what we're doing now, Chevy? Am I going to have to kink shame you?
Don't you have no fear? Put your hands on your hip.
There are also a lot of really cool muscle cars that came out in that era too. I mean, think about it. 77, 78 Pontiac Trans Am, Smokey and the Bandit. And that's another car company that really wasn't affected because they still made muscle cars. They still made those Firebirds and Trans Ams through the 70s into the 80s. They didn't slow down. They weren't the most powerful, but it was still a muscle car. Same thing with AMC. They made the Gremlin and also they had the AMX. I mean, that thing was cool, but it just came out in the wrong time because with all the restrictions, all the emissions, it kind of killed the car a little bit. I gotta go on a little side tangent about Hearst. You know, the guys who make the shifters, like t-shirts, like those guys. They made some crazy special editions. Seriously, they had the Hearst Olds Aero package. If that's not the most 80s thing ever, what is that?
Let your backbone slip and work out.
In conclusion, don't sleep on Malaise era cars, or trucks, or anything really from the Malaise era that was American. Because there were some really cool, weird special editions, and there's still some of those that you can still find out there for cheap. Way cheaper than you could find for anything in the 60s. That kind of comes down to it, is that you give it a little bit of love, you give it some attention, and then a swap or two, and you can make these things just amazing. So, I'm Joseph. That's all.
Shout, turn it